Back when we finally got a closer look at khaenri'ah through Rayrir's memories, we learned that King Irmin went by the full title of Irminsul, a name that is, of course, shared by the planet's world tree. But we still don't know the exact nature of Irmin's connection to Irminsul. I mean, Irminsul already has an avatar in the form of the Dendro Archon, so what exactly is Irmin supposed to be? Is he a dark Nahida? Does the King of khaenri'ah share a purely symbolic title with the World Tree? With all of the name lore that came from Durin's story quest, I'm inclined to believe there's more to it than the latter guess. It just so happens that I have a theory for this that I would like to share. I think that the Irminsul tree is a foreign entity to the planet, one that essentially took over Nibelung's role as the original Weaver of Fate. As a result of this world tree practically overwriting Nibelung's identity, he reincarnated in the form of Irmin. I've recently found myself unable to escape from a nagging feeling that Irmin and Nibelung are connected. It's pretty easy to compare them, since they were both kings that not only existed in opposition to the heavenly principles, but also became obsessed with abyssal power. Irmin's obsession with the abyss led to the fall of khaenri'ah, while Nibelung's wrath towards his usurper led to the end of the unified civilization. I've also found it easy to conflate the abyssal corrupted Nibelung with Irmin when dealing with certain allegorical lore sources in-game, such as the Night King mentioned in Durin's weapon lore. And yeah, maybe this is all just because they are meant to serve as narrative parallels to each other. Or maybe there's an extra layer of meaning hidden behind these narrative parallels. Maybe Irmin and Nibelung really do come from the same soul. After Nibelung died, he could have been reincarnated as some sort of shadow of Irminsul. To provide a brief rundown on how I came to this conclusion, Nibelung is described as the primeval dragon born alongside the planet, which I've interpreted as him being the avatar of the planet in the same kind of way the moon goddesses are avatars of their moons, or Nahida is an avatar of Irminsul. While Nibelung was gone, his world was taken and the usurper installed a tree-shaped computer as the planet's new core. Nibelung eventually returned, carrying the power of the Abyss, and was defeated in his very own war of vengeance. At some point, the Dragon King once again manifested in the physical world as a dark representation of Irminsul. Since he's the avatar of the planet and the presence of the Irminsul tree has altered the planet down to its very foundations. It's not exactly a stretch to assume that Nibelung might return with a human form, given Nouvelette's existence. Sure, this idea very much relies on the theory that Irminsul is foreign to Teyvat, but honestly, I think that theory is very likely to be true. I will, of course, be going over all the fine details throughout the rest of the video. Before we get into all that, just know you can find spoiler warnings in the description, and any necessary corrections will go in a pinned comment. Now, without further ado, let's unpack this theory. To start, I'd like to take a look at the mythological backgrounds and etymology of both Nibelung and Irmin, because they bounce off of each other in some interesting ways once Genshin's lore is also considered. The Nibelung are a race of dwarves mentioned in a Germanic epic poem known as the Nibelungenlied. Hoyo is more specifically getting it from their love of Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle, which uses inspiration from the Nibelungenlied. The Ring Cycle inspiration is heavily present in khaenri'ah lore due to the Germanic umbrella that this nation gets its inspiration from. Since mythological dwarves are usually regarded as underground dwellers, it's not exactly difficult to thematically connect dwarves to a subterranean nation like khaenri'ah. We can also look at the known descendant of khaenri'ah, Kaya Alberic, since Alberic is a character in Wagner's Ring Cycle. Alberic is a Nibelung dwarf that steals a precious hoard of gold and fashions it into a magical ring. Which brings me to Dainsleif, who is in possession of a magic ring that was given to him by his brother Vedrfolnir. With all of the thematic relevance Nibelung dwarves have in relation to khaenri'ah, maybe Nibelung is somehow directly tied to this nation. Taking a look at the etymology of Nibelung, the meaning falls rather close to Children of the Mist, or something of the like. While contemplating the phrase, "Children of the Mist," my thoughts landed on Tsurumi Island, due to the island being completely isolated from the rest of the world by a dense fog. The people that once called this misty island their home were all wiped out by the very being they worshipped as their god, the Thunderbird. I'm of the opinion that the Thunderbird has some sort of thematic relevance to Oz, and therefore Fischl. The story that Fischl gets her whole LARP personality from, Flowers for Princess Fischl, happens to be a storybook retelling of khaenri'ah. Based on presumed depictions of King Irmin, he and Fischl both serve as Odin allegories, since they both keep one eye covered. I'm also pretty sure that Tsurumi Island's pre-Thunderbird civilization has some sort of connection to khaenri'ah. The ruins are the same style as the ones on Dragonspine, and with both places playing host to a divine nail, I've come to associate them with Soidervoinen and Koitar's rebellious faction from the Funerary War. The survivors of this faction were most likely the people who founded khaenri'ah. Also, when I was going through the Crimson Moon space, I couldn't help but notice how the remnants of the iridescent moon and the energy dripping off of them looked a lot like one of the Tsurumi Island murals. This imagery also happens to be present in the mural of Nibelung and the Moons found in Ochkanatlan. When it comes to Irminsul, the term is derived from a sacred pillar-like object revered by the Old Saxons. As a world pillar that held up the sky, connected heaven to earth, and served as the axis around which the world spins, it's a pretty standard world tree type concept. Teyvat's version of Irminsul obviously serves the same purpose, just with some additional features such as storing memories and calculating the future based on those memories. The Old Norse version of the word Irmin is Jormunr, which is one of Odin's names. Jormunr can also be connected to the mythological world serpent Jormungandr, said to be a serpent that dwells in the world sea and surrounds the entire earth, biting its own tail in an Ouroboros fashion. This makes plenty of sense for Irminsul, since its leyline system encompasses all of Teyvat. However, considering the fact that dragons can be regarded as a serpent-like race, this also gives me an excuse to connect the title of Irminsul back to Nibelung. Which is interesting, since the game piece representing Vedrfolnir depicted an Ouroboros with eyes and teeth that had the same coloration as Nibelung's depiction in the Ochkanatlan mural. With all of the etymology and mythology covered, I'd like to take a closer look at the concept of Irminsul being foreign to Teyvat, since this theory does rely on that idea. There are some narratives that could definitely be foreshadowing this, such as the Sacred Sakura, as well as the Parable of the Tree from Before Sun and Moon. It's something I've touched on before in one of my Dainsleif videos, but since then we've gotten new lore that can tie into all of this. Ever since version Luna 4, there's been a lot of talk among the lore community about the information revealed by Traveler's outfit. It brought this whole revelation that the Heavenly Principles might really be an AI that originally came from Traveler's ship. I briefly acknowledged this in my last video, but I was saving the longer version of my interpretation for this theory. Evidently, this spaceship that carried the twins through the Sea of Stars was meant to be some sort of ark searching for another habitable world. The whole concept is rather identical to Project Ark from Honkai Impact 3's second key manga. The project involved an ark of retained knowledge carrying a copy of the Human Genome Library. This ark was sent out into space to search for another habitable world for humanity. Meanwhile, As Heaven and Earth Are Made Anew describes Traveler's ship as a pioneer vessel bearing the spark of civilization, and even mentions a genetic vault on board. The second key panels mentioning Project Ark look nearly identical to the scene of the twins' spaceship crashing into Teyvat. Whether they are directly connected remains to be seen, but at the very least Hoyo is going for the same sort of idea here. Knowing that, at some point in the distant past, Traveler's ship flew by Teyvat but didn't land, there's a good chance that this planet was chosen as the new home for human civilization. The ship dropped off the Heavenly Principles, and probably our other sibling, before leaving. The timeline seems to match up in terms of Primordial One's arrival, This also might explain why our sibling arrived from outside the ship, despite the fact that we never saw anyone exit. This next point is something I brought up in the last Dainsliff video, but since it is a major point as to why I believe Irminsul may be a foreign entity, I am going to rehash it. There's a book called Legend of the Shattered Halberd, which is one of the titles that comes from Nicole's friend, Mr. Nine. The stories they distribute are an intentional mixture of truth and fiction, allowing them to surreptitiously share aspects of Tevat's true history. With the way that Shattered Halberd is presented, this story is generally accepted as Gnosis lore. The divine halberds mentioned in this book's narrative might be an allegory for descenders, since the Shattered Halberd in question seems to represent the third descender who was carved into the seven Gnosis. Volume 6 of this book states that the first divine halberd, Irmin, once pierced the Axis Mundi and connected the 9 worlds. This certainly makes Irminsul sound like it may be an external entity. Given this wording, I've started to wonder if Irminsul is this ark of retained knowledge. It started out as a seed of knowledge bearing the spark of human civilization, and it was through this seed that Tevat's human realm came to be. This wording is also presented in a way where it sounds like Irminsul could be regarded as the true first descender rather than Phanes. Perhaps because Phanes is just an avatar for the AI system contained in the Ark. When the world was remade under the Heavenly Principles, they apparently changed this planet down to its very foundations. Under my current interpretation of things, Irminsul would be the medium through which these major changes were applied. It became the planet's new foundation. Once the Moon Sisters handed over authority, heaven and earth were made anew for the sake of housing humanity, and that new world was created based on data and memories carried within the Ark, with Irminsul being the vessel through which these memories were installed onto the planet. Because the web event preceding Nodcry's release referred to Nibelung as the planet's now nameless ruler, I'm pretty sure that the power of names ties into all of this as well. With Nibelung essentially being the avatar of the planet, I wonder if the introduction of Irminsul as the new foundation of the world stripped the Dragon King of his authority, name, and purpose. This could explain why one of Natlan's murals depicts Nibelung trying to destroy Irminsul. Nibelung wanted to get rid of the silvery white tree because it doesn't belong there, and it is directly responsible for the hijacking of everything that once belonged to him. Perhaps he and Dottore can bond over this shared interest one day. Having been stripped of authority, name, and purpose by a tree, the fallen Dragon King, steeped in abyssal power, might have returned as a dark manifestation that had taken on Irminsul's name.
But I don't like being around these creepy trees. I don't want to be a tree. I want my superhero gear back.
Similar to Nouvelette, his new form was that of a human's. Only in Nibelung's case, he had been so thoroughly affected by abyssal power that his returned form was closer to being an abyssal manifestation than an actual person, like we saw with Rayrir. In fact, I've actually had a theory for a while now that Rayrir's body being the source of the Wild Hunt is meant to foreshadow that all of Tevat is having the same problem, only with Nibelung's remains. Not even just Nibelung's body, but also the planet itself. Which might actually be pretty indistinguishable now that I think about it, especially if you consider the finale of the Deep Galleries, where we have Nibelung saying, "If the tide of oblivion must come, then let my bones be the bulwark that shields this realm." But even aside from that, if we regard Nibelung as the avatar of the planet, then that abyssal power he took on would most likely have transferred over. Based on what we know, that which has affected the gods serving as the avatar will also affect the divine object they are an avatar of, and vice versa. For example, Rukkhadevada's abyssal corruption was transferred to Irminsul. When the moons were shattered, Sonnet felt herself being torn apart. The abyss is everywhere, because as a consequence of Nibelung's choice to merge with the abyss, it also thoroughly affected the planet itself. For this reason, I basically see Irmin as something that manifested from Nibelung's resentment and hatred that is erupting from the planet. Which does bring me to the final layer of this explanation, which has to do with understanding the Abyss. I'm pretty sure the Abyss has always just been the primordial chaos from the beginning of time, which fits with Barbalat's theory of the Abyss being unchosen fate, since the primordial chaos would just be all fates existing all at once before any of them have had a chance to happen yet. As unchosen fate, I don't think the Abyss has much of an agenda besides wanting to be chosen, wanting to be a part of things. Therefore, it mimics and reflects the world it wants to be a part of. Any will or intent the Abyss seems to have is a reflection of the world, not something that comes from the void itself. This is why I believe the loathing resentment that the Abyss seems to have towards Teyvat isn't actually coming from the Abyss, it is coming from the very planet. From Nibelung's residual will. The Phobos Symphony from the Remurian civilization is actually a great example for the concept I'm trying to convey here. Phobos was essentially a music-oriented loom of fate created by King Remus in an attempt to circumvent the fate originating from Celestia's order. It was a symphony that reflected the will of humanity. Phobos was created from an angel named Sibylla, who had been severely affected by erosion and therefore had lost pretty much all of her own persona and will. The only real wish Sibylla had left was, "I want all humans to be happy." As a result, when Phobos answered human wishes, it didn't just reflect humanity's well-meaning wishes, but also humanity's malice and hatred. This threw Remuria into chaos, which ultimately led to its downfall. The Abyss is just like Phobos. It lacks a will of its own, so it reflects the energies put out by the world. It truly is just a mirror. When it comes to these looms of fate that reflect collective human will, it does seem like particularly powerful wills can overtake influence on the system. This is what was happening with the residual will of Boethius during the Canticles of Harmony questline. The problems weren't arising from the will of Phobos itself, they were coming from an echo of Boethius. Just like how the Phobos flare-up was caused by Boethius's will, Teyvat's abyssal flare-ups are caused by Nibelung's will, which is still pissed off that his planet was taken from him. Perhaps Irmin has always just been the coalesced form of this hatred, the loathing, resentful avatar of a stolen world. Because I very much see Durin as an allegory for Nibelung, I am of the belief that there will eventually be a way to bring him back as a human, one that's more akin to a person than an abyssal manifestation. There's even a book that was available during the Simulanka event that connects all of these points I am getting at. That is, the blurred line that exists between Nibelung and Irmin, khaenri'ah lore, Durin being an allegory for Nibelung. It is all reflected in this relatively short readable called Dreams of the Ancient Capital. The book is rather obviously about the Abyss Twin, following the journey of a young woman named Lycia, whose homeland was destroyed at the hands of a black dragon. In the beginning, Lycia encounters a former guard of the kingdom, from whom she hopes to learn the art of wielding a sword. Unfortunately, the guard has lost all hope and the will to wield a sword. During the next step of her journey, Lycia obtains a key to the Kingdom of Dreams, which, side note, sounds a hell of a lot like the silver key from the Lovecraft mythos that I based my entire Moongate video around. Once she enters the Kingdom of Dreams, Lycia trades a lock of her golden hair to the Dream Goddess, and in return is able to learn the art of luring someone into a dream. After that, Lycia uses this art to lure the dragon into a dream, which allows the dragon to traverse innumerable worlds in the Land of Dreams. By the end of this journey, the dragon who once only knew black and white finally recognizes the vibrance that can be found in the hues of the universe. Once the dragon realizes this, Lycia offers a new beginning, declaring that she can turn back time to the day the dragon arrived in her hometown. After Lycia awakens in that very hometown, she hears a gentle knocking at her door. Standing on her doorstep is a dark-haired stranger, who greets her with the remark, "I cannot distinguish the color of your hair, but it must be golden, just like the color of the stars in my dreams." The dragon, once shrouded in darkness and bringing forth destruction, has now been given the chance to turn over a new leaf by living as a human, just like our sweet Durin. In this case, I really feel like the dragon would be Irmin. While it was the Archons and Renova who destroyed khaenri'ah, it was Irmin's actions that led up to that. Vedrfolnir even tried to warn him about this inevitable fate. The whole narrative of this short story blurs the line between Irmin and Nibelung to being almost non-existent, which is why I ultimately believe that their existence is tied to the same soul. I've had this theory on my mind for a while, but I didn't really have enough to say for it to amount to a proper full video until recently. If you made it all the way to the end and you're still here, you are greatly appreciated. If you'd like to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. Leave a like and a comment for the engagement and to feed the algorithm. You can offer additional support through Patreon or Ko-fi if you would like. With all of that being said, I hope I'll see you next time.